good evening, everybody, and welcome to my introduction to Antiquaships and the historic model shipwright. It's a combination which is born of a recent project over 3 years where we've decided to try and open up the art of model shipwriting to more of the general public outside of the museum environment. So my talk with you this evening focuses on restoring models from the age of ships that once sailed the oceans and looking towards the model shipwright conservator, which is looking at trying to conserve some of the models already built and have some history. I've broken my presentation into two parts. One, to use a situation which I come across regularly, which is about the history of the ship or the model that I'm working on, backing it up to a story which explains why that's important. And the first part is a look at the Lordships of the Admiralty, the shipwright, the shipyard, and the admiral. And that will come next, followed by Antiquaships, our charter, and our home, which is at English Willow in Somerset, and why we're doing what we do. And it's in pursuit of the 21st century conservator. So our situation and our story. And what we're looking at now, if you come with me to 1757, it's Friday, May 6th at 6 bells in the afternoon watch. That's probably all of you know what 6 bells means, of course. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The place is His Majesty's Royal Dockyard at Deptford in London, England. And the ship is HMS Dublin, a new 74-gun third-rate ship of the line. We'll come across how that's important as we go through the presentation. But for now, stay with me in 1757. So Deptford's important as a naval dockyard, and as you'll all appreciate, the base at Deptford on the River Thames was operated by the Royal Navy throughout the 16th and 19th centuries, and it built and maintained warships for over 350 years, and many illustrious events and ships have been associated with it. And as it was then, it was key to the Thames and key to the Royal Navy. It was used purposefully for some of the larger ships that were built from 74s upwards. And our relationship begins here today with HMS Dublin at Deptford. Of course, Dublin was part of a class of ships that the first 74 guns to be designed for the Royal Navy and marked the beginning of a more dynamic era from the standard designs. And for the first ships, it was 7. The picture, of course, is of HMS Mars. And, of course, the Dublin class of ships were Dublin, Norfolk, Shrewsbury, Lennox, Mars, Warspite, and Resolution in the first class of ships. Dublin was the first ship to be launched and given to Admiral Rodney as his first post-captain command. Sir Thomas Slade, of course, was the shipwright best known for designing the 104-gun first-rate Victory. But Thomas was born arguably 1703 and died on 1771, 23rd of February, and was particular on how he designed his ships and took many of his learnings on the 74-gun from the French warships of the era. But he was responsible for the Dublin class of 74s, and in particular HMS Dublin was the first where he managed to organize a design which took account of some of the best of the French warship together with some of the best of the British build at Deptford. So these two slides are important, largely on the basis that from 1755, when the first 2 orders were transmitted to Deptford, there was a great deal of work done about the keel lengths and the gun deck lengths, moving from the 70-gun ships of Burford and Dorsetshire and moving into the 74 guns of Dublin class. They were some 4.5 feet longer on the gun decks of the preceding 70-gun ships. But that became important when they were designing the keel lengths, and that came to be about a problem. And I use these particular references largely on the basis of when we're trying to understand what to do in restoration of ships models that account for change, whether they were pre-changes in the draft or whether they were post-change in the draft. And some of the research that goes into understanding why the model was built in the first instance. And in this case, Dublin's models were built on the basis of his first keel length and then developed thereafter. So this slide is important for the moment, and soon after this slide we'd leave Dublin behind, but for now it's important that this is a complicated slide in terms of its text, but I want you to take account of the keel lengths. We begin at 133 foot 5.5, we go to 134 foot 6, and finish at 135-foot 2. And for the moment, that's all I need you to understand about this particular slide. It shows you the complex decision making between 133 feet and 135 foot. And we'll come back to Dublin, Slade, the Admiral, and the dockyard a little bit later. We focus on George Bridges Rodney. To some of you, he's probably well known. To others, he may not be at all. But he was a Georgian admiral, famous, of course, for his love of king and country and ship and crew, and of course his family. Flawed individual, of course. He was a gambler, and that underlined his history as an admiral. Salvaged by his son George, but by and large, he formed the basis of some of the best warfighting skills that Georgian admirals would later enjoy. And some of the ship design was important, using Dublin as a fulcrum, from which he then managed to command his fleets and ship designers and shipwrights to be able to take account of the changes he made to the warships. So we come to Antiquaships, and this is a project centered in an 18th century barn within 200 acres of the Somerset Levels. And it's a project that began on the basis that we needed to introduce shipwriting, model shipwriting, to a younger audience and a more capable audience with a mind to becoming professional ship modelers, shipwrights, or conservators. And we chose the Somerset Levels on the basis that we had good access to the workshop, we had parking, and we had an artisan hub capability around us, from cabinet makers to glaziers. And this was important in forming up the establishment of Antiquaships. Just a touch really on my background with Antiquaships. I'm a professional aircraft engineer and a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. And I gained my modeling skills from preparing aerospace engineering models for a number of reasons, and became a component part of flight test engineering, from flying to establishing changes to aircraft from models built. And I began ship modeling with the National Museum of the Royal Navy at Yeovilton and at Greenwich. And through those years, I began to develop skills which were probably more competent in restoration than it were in new build. And I've had about 26 years of professional shipwright restoration work, with the emphasis very much on, I guess, 80% of my time is restoration. The other 20% is new build on commissions. Antiquaships really serves two parts of its business: institutional clients, and they may well be museums, from the Maritime Museum to English Heritage to Landmark Trust and so on, Science Museum. International collectors. There are about 30 known international collectors with estates and model collections of over 250 models. Some of the top 10 carry almost 500 exhibition and builders class models, and they are international by choice. And of course, notable auction houses, where they often collect these models for sale at auction, and sometimes are sold with a commission in place. Sometimes they're sold to new buyers who then seek the commissions to have the models restored. But in this particular project at the Somerset Workshop, we look to include UK, local and UK-based private clients, and local and UK-based antique businesses. And on those 2 points, it's important for Antiquaships, whereby we've been able to come away from the institutional models for a little while and look into the private clients which surround the workshop. And these may well be throughout England itself. Certainly the reach is 200 to 300 miles away, where people have suddenly found themselves a restorer or conservator, whereby a family heirloom, once forgotten, once left behind or found in the corner of the garage where the cars run over it several times, they previously hadn't had access to somebody who might have been able to restore that model back to something they recognize. And so we've had great success with reaching out to local clients and UK-based private clients, where previously we haven't been able to touch them because they didn't know of our existence, or they didn't have access to a restorer or a conservator. And the antique business is important because the antique businesses sweep through and salvage the lost models, so models which are forgotten, left behind, parts of an estate, a deceased estate. And the antique dealers historically have been quite poor in their management of the models, or at least their understanding of the model. And using our services of Antiquaships, local antique businesses particularly, are using our services to better understand the history of the model, its provenance, where it came from, who owned it, why it was built in the first place, and why it's important. And that's adding real value and puts a value back onto the model where previously it might have been swept under the carpet and bought for very little money at all. And we're able to add some provenance to it and give it a future whereby it might be bought and then took into restoration and be put back into its case once upon a time. So we have a charter, and the charter is into 3 parts. And we want to provide an environment to restore and repair and preserve. And these are antique and historic ship models. Tend to be very few new, only by commission, as I said, about 20%, but 80% of the business really is about the restoration and repair and preservation of models. And part of that component, I would say at least 50% of that component, is its provenance. It's the work we do to better understand why the model was built, who built it, when it was built, and what importance the model itself has on maritime history. And that can be from a family piece all the way through to an institutional model. It doesn't really rest very much on very specialized ownership. They can trip over ownership quite easily, find something in the attic or inherit something which previously was regarded as something not very important. We can add value by the research we do. The other part of our charter is to further the profession of the model shipwright. What we try to do is take a look at the interest shown at our workshop. And a lot of the interest shown is model enthusiasts, of course, hobbyists, part-time amateur, and the remaining visitors are new to the model history or the model experience entirely and trip across it because we are in a willow farm as opposed to anywhere else, and they trip across the shipwright workshop quite by accident. But what we want to try and do is to further the profession of the model shipwright by the establishment of a mentor program, and we've been quite successful recently in attracting school workplaces and apprentice selection sessions. We have an appetite for 3 apprentices and apprentice grant research. So the apprentices, really, we want to try and work with 4 institutions. One is going to be obviously the funder. The second will be Courtaulds Institute in London. The third will be the Royal Museums of Greenwich, and of course Warwick University or Bournemouth University for their degree. But the school workplaces is a great start from that, and we've been surprised, beyond surprised, at how interesting school children have been. So from the ages of 12 through to 16, the school program for associated work is overbooked. We haven't got enough time or spaces, and both parents and school children have been amazingly interested in what the profession of model shipwright might be. And some of their skills are astonishing too. And then, of course, we want to introduce the visiting public to the open restoration workshops. So part of the individuality of Antiquaships is the fact that whilst the ship models are being restored or preserved or in some way built, the general public can visit the process and sit by the bench and watch the process go through. And they can witness the restoration and progress and learn of the provenance and history of the piece. And by that, we mean they can understand better what that might have been as a family piece, or in fact, something which is brand new to them because they visited just by opportunity basis only. So this is our building. It's taken at Christmas time by the looks of it. And it's a 18th century barn used previously as a prisoner of war shelter through 1943 to 1946. It has German and Italian prisoners of war and had in itself some model making in the very early days. So let's take a look at each of these elements of our charter in a little bit more detail. So in the provision of the environment, to date, an investment of about £175,000 has been spent to establish a workshop and research space capable of producing about 180 hours of restorative work per week. And this is open hours. So in other words, every time the workshop is open, the public can access the workshop and watch the process from start to finish. They can come back at booked times, they can make bookings to come in. But by and large, it's a visit just because they have an opportunity to visit, or it's just by chance an opportunity. And then we want to try and continue and develop the knowledge center regarding restoration and preservation, because what's unique about what we're trying to do is to introduce people to how important the model is, why it has the importance, or in fact, how insignificant it might be, yet very special. And to try and have the conversation about the model's history is really difficult if you don't have free access to the public who want to understand, or perhaps are learning for the first time, the importance of the model. And so therefore, it's really key that we get this knowledge center started, and from a professional standpoint, focusing on restoration and preservation, to form and develop a hub of artisans supporting or specializing in the renovation of the historic model. And that can be really down to something as specific as the glass used in mirror-back models, mirror-back case models, which are Edwardian and earlier, use a very specific glass, of course. And in the restoration of those models, it's important you use that period glass for the use of the reflection. Modern mirrors, of course, as you will know, reflect past the glass. So the first thing you see is the glass and then the reflection. An Edwardian mirror, of course, will give you a reflection first and the glass will follow. So it's a seamless reflection on those older models. And an understanding of access to that particular glass, or how to manage and restore that glass, is important. And one of the artisan support centers we've set up is two glaziers who support the business, focusing on antique and classical mirrors. And in furthering the profession, visibility is the key, really. Regardless of age, exposure to the profession is necessary to encourage a professional future. By that, we mean making a step change for the older modeler from being a hobbyist or amateur to seeing if there's a professional opportunity for them. One of the apprentice candidates we have is 40 years old, a professional engineer, previously looking after family and paying the mortgage, never saw an opportunity to be able to step away from hobbyist, because as we all know, and the audience we have today are competent and highly capable modelers, but previously have had a day job, which means they're more focused on that than they are on anything else, and use the hobby as a pastime as opposed to anything else. And this particular opportunity we've got at Antiquaships is trying to encourage those talented hobbyists and amateurs to step across into professional model making, but particularly focused on conservation and preservation. And again, part of that conservation and preservation effort is to understand how to research, what to look for in the research, and how important to the provenance of the piece the value of that research will be. And I go back to the point whereby we have at least 50% of the effort in restoration of the models can be in the research taken to try and understand how it was built, what materials it was using, and why it's important. And I touch back on the point I was making about the take-up of places for our annual workplaces from all major schools with a 20-mile radius, and that's 31 schools, and we're oversubscribed, and that's just from the school children. And that's not by pressing a press gang motive from parents. This is the children being, because we have plenty of school visits and plenty of school children visit during the weekends. It's their effort and it's their decision to try and take a place at workplace. And our apprenticeship program has sourced over 300 high-value applications for the apprentices we have this year. And our research into apprenticeship funding is having some success with the Routledge Trust at the moment, as we're trying to negotiate what that means for us. And in terms of the effort to introduce the visiting public to an open restoration workshop, again, visibility is the key. And to build interest in participation and knowledge to further appreciate the historic model, the shipwright, the build, and the period material, it's really important. And we've seen an astonishing take-up of interest with that. Yes, the model is interesting. The model, when it's finished and completed, is a beautiful thing. But the interest in the story of how or why the model was built has proved astonishingly popular. Almost taken by surprise how interesting folks have found it, particularly those who are considering getting into professional model restoration. And it's access to the shipwright and to study the methodology and witness research and history telling. And this is part of the Society of Model Shipwrights benefit, whereby access to the log, access to the members and access to the library has proved a valuable resource in encouraging people to understand why the shipwright and why the model is important. And of course, conversation. Because we've created an open workshop, it's a buzz of conversation when visitors arrive, mainly from surprise when they come in the door. They weren't expecting to see what they saw, or even if they were expecting it, finding themselves inexorably drawn into conversation about the models. Even our meeting this evening is all about the model we might consider building next, or being a part of, or sharing. Conversation is powerful, and the recollection of visitors and model experiences in life, in other words, witnessing grandfather's model, witnessing uncle's model, or being presented with a model, or whatever it might be, it unearths a passionate memory in many, to the point that interest and ownership is sought. They go home and find the missing model, find the model that grandpa left behind, and want to understand more about it. And we find ourselves facing more and more inquiries about what to do with the model. So where are we? Well, we're at Coates English Willow Visitor Centre, and that's in Stoke St Gregory in Taunton, Somerset. And people will probably understand that Somerset levels are quite important. And willow making goes back centuries. It's a 5th generation farm, 200 acres. And the maritime connection is twofold. One, it's willow chairs on some of the great liners in the turn of the century, and of fenders of the early ships. We're using willow fenders, and English Willow have a museum on site which has examples of some of those deck furniture and fenders. So there is some historical connection, although it's tenuous, I must admit. People often ask when they come into Antiquaships, why Somerset? They expect us to be near the sea. Well, tenuous links it may be, but the ancient port of Bridgewater is but 5 miles away via the rivers Tone and Parrett. And the picture you can see on the scene at the moment, look into the horizon, and that high ground at the horizon is actually the River Parrett. The flooding you see below is part of the Somerset level function. And that depth of water from the river itself is 12 foot deep as you look towards the horizon. And it comes down to where I'm standing, where the photograph was taken, to where my toes are in the water. And that's a regular occurrence at the winter levels. So water's not so unfamiliar to Antiquaships. A daylight picture was centered in an 18th century barn. The centre offers cafe, shops, a willow museum, free parking and woodland walks. So we've been purposeful in trying to place it into a part of Somerset where visitors will come. So in trying to give the art of model making, of model preservation and restoration some traction to get the visitors close to it, we've been particular in centering the barn and the business in a place where the general public can access us easily, and that we've had some success in that. And of course, just as an example, with the recent floods, as you can see, the floodwaters got very close. They didn't enter the barn, but we might well have been afloat at some point. So our core strategy, really, behind the charter, we look towards the skills that many in the audience have and look to where they might transfer those skills or pass those skills on to, or if there's anybody looking over their shoulder as you make your next model, who's watching, who's learning. At Antiquaships, that was what we're trying to do. We're trying to give a window into the work and the art of the shipwright. And by virtue of the open workshop, it means as they watch a shipwright work, and it could well be one of the team, or it could be a visiting shipwright, they can watch the art of shipwriting and gain an interest or understand better the artistry and work that's going into it. But we regard the heritage skills are disappearing, and Antiquaships increasingly cares about the endangered craft knowledge, the tacit skills, clearly the loss of apprentices, its traditions and material culture. One of the models we have in the workshop on material culture has balustrades to the upper deck that is tortoise shell and alabaster. The rigging is a mixture of hemp and elephant hair. And of course, the copper plating to the hull and a walnut and teak carcass to the hull. So the various materials in just one model and the model was built in 1817, is quite important. The traditions that went into building that model, how it was formed, the materials used is important. And the apprentice that built it, because we don't believe, although we understand the shipwright, Bomber G. Wadia, to have been principal in the construction of the model, we think it was one or two of his apprentices that built the model. The model belongs to English heritage. And of course, the tacit skills, which lay in the historic model, building the historic model, versus those that build the more modern model. And of course, that endangered craft knowledge, as the artisan is lost, moves out of the profession, becomes injured, can't build anymore, or passes away. Those skills are lost. And part of Antiquaships is to make sure we can trap those, because we appreciate that the working model shipwright embodies all of those assets. Just looking to the inside, what the view you're looking at on the slide at the moment, that's looking from inside the workshop out into the visitor porch, just by the front door as it comes in. And that's a ship model which belongs to a broker in Panama. It's one of 12 ships that's coming through for restoration. That's number 3. And that's coming through. That model's been in the sun a little bit too long in Panama, and it's been gathering a little bit of oxidization inside the case. And that's one of the projects we'll have for August this year. We found in our experience recently that younger audiences, which are vital to continue the art of model shipwriting, they need process, not just objects. And modern audiences engage through the art of making something, of seeing the process, of immersion into that process, whether being listening or watching or being a part of it, understanding the authenticity. And by that, I mean the quality of the need to build, of the history, of the design, of the requirement of the commission, whatever it might be. It's an important thing when somebody commissions the restoration of a piece or of a new model. And of course, the story. And the younger audiences wrap themselves around this more readily than one could imagine. And it's quite an exciting process to watch them become engaged in, whether it's a restoration or whether in fact they're making something new to be a part of an older ship. Sure. But visible craftsmanship delivers all 5 of those core strategic needs to make younger audience engage with model making. Just a brief look at the workstations. You can see in front of the main workbench, it's a willow hedge panel. And we use willow quite extensively in the workshop to illustrate our relationship with the Willow Center. But to the left, you can see a model from the Maritime Museum, which is just completed. That's Risley. On the bench, there's a pre-dreadnought, 2 or 3 pre-dreadnoughts, a Razy frigate, and a model from the National Maritime Museum. Sorry, the National Museum of the Royal Navy, and some half blocks on the wall and beyond. Again, some of the workstations that we have and to generate those work hours, not unusual to anybody, of course, but the fact that they're facing the front door means as people come in, they can gain access to the shipwright easily, can walk around and have conversations. And whilst they can't enter behind the workbenches, they can get very close to the workbenches. And if we make arrangements, particular arrangements, they can, of course, come and share a stool and get involved with the restoration process. So when we look at the clients that we have, we look at imaginative institutions that are investing. And by that, I look at the museums which are investing in how they're going to take the museum experience forward, whether that's hard artifact, whether that's systems or accessibility or even additions to the museum themselves. Institutions are trying hard now, I believe, to get better at trying to illustrate the artifacts they might have to tell the maritime story. And it's experience-led interpretation, immersive digital layers. And by that, I mean using social media, using cameras, systems like I'm going to explain a little bit later, visible conservation and storytelling spaces such as we have in Antiquaships, because watching the conservation, having that conversation with either an interested party, the owner, or for that matter, the shipwright, is an engaging process. Families visit, and for the first time, we're seeing what that looks like, whether it's grandfather visiting with his grandchildren, or for that matter, children bringing their parents because they've heard and they want to see some more. But it's research accessibility too. So it's about when they visit Antiquaships, not only can they see and touch what's going on, but they can go and sit quietly and access the library and try to better understand the stories behind the ships, the reasons why the ships were put to sea, whether it's for cargo or wartime. But the research accessibility in the same organization has been important. And I think that institutions are beginning to bring those 5 things together when they try and make up an opportunity for the museum to take advantage of the visitor. Static museums often still rely on labels and cabinets, old lighting, and passive browsing. And the passive browsing, I think, is the virus that really slows the whole process down of appreciation of the model. So ship models are prestigious, and we all know they're underused, and most institutions possess valuable model collections, but many are trapped in glass cases, poorly lit, minimally interpreted, and hard for younger audiences to connect with. That's, in fact, even if the model makes it to the exhibition floor. Less than 5% of some collections make it to the museum floor. The rest remain in archival storage. But it's these 2 points that we believe creates a gap for 360 immersive concept. And the 360 immersive concept, I was hoping to have it accessible for this presentation, but it'll be secured by next month because we've filmed everything we need to do. And this 360 immersive concept is a live access to the workshop by virtue of clicking on a link, and you can come into the workshop from wherever you are in the world and fly through the workshop with your camera, much as you might do with Google Maps, and fly through the workshop to see work in hand. Although it won't be live, it will be near time and it'll be updated regularly. And you'll be able to see and witness some of the models and some of the work being undertaken from a 360-degree immersive concept, which is going to be accessible from next month. We've got the draft out at the moment, and I've got some links, and I'll share with some of you who want to make inquiries thereafter. Happy to share the draft examples of what the 360 concept looks like, but it's a very exciting process. Again, the effort is trying to bring the visitor closer, it's trying to bring the uninitiated closer to the art of model shipwriting. And I make the point that where traditional museums show, here's a model, we show here's how it was conceived, built, understood, and experienced. We try and give the background to the model. Yes, the model is important, and the model is attractive, and the model is exciting in its own right. But often it's matched by its story. It's matched by how it was conceived, why it was conceived. And I touch back on our opening gambit with Slade, with George Rodney, with the Admiralty, and with the shipyard itself. It's the story about why the model was important. And that's what we try to do to make a difference between traditional museums' exhibition of here's a model. We want to show how it's conceived, built, and understood, not because we want to be different, it's because we want to add value and help encourage museums to take up the opportunity to make it a more rounded experience when looking at the models. Again, just some internal shots. This is the reception area as you come into Antiquaships. We try to keep it as open as possible. The door is literally on your left shoulder. And as you come on in, there may be areas you can't gain access to all the time, and that's because maybe some machinery is going on or having to get clear access to move something, glass cabinets particularly. We also have plenty of seating, comfortable seating, and access to library bookshelves wherever the opportunity is to put one. And of course, we try to make it lit well, and it's comfortable, and it's in a sociable and engaging place to be. So our core thesis really on why museums need working craftsmanship experience is that most museums preserve the finished objects, and that's their job, is to do that. But few show how they were made and how skills were transmitted and what labor created them, and the human intelligence behind the craftsmanship. Because frequently when you look at builders' models, the model was built as the shipwright was drawing it. And it's only by the production of the model did it conceive whether or not, in fact, the ship itself would ever make it from the blocks and into the water. Because often the intelligence behind the craftsmanship in the model would prove that a production case wasn't valid, wasn't viable, and therefore you should go back literally to the drawing board. But this thesis, we think, provides that missing layer that we think is the delta between the static model and something more live. So why it matters? Static displays need human energy. These days, it's what's important, because so much is overwhelmed by social media, by interaction with virtual technology, with AI. So the static display needs access to human energy. In some way, human has to interact with the display. A model in a case is admired, but a working craft demonstration is remembered. Simply by taking the case off to do something to the model is engaging. And that uses human energy to do it, not only to do the work itself, but for people to take time to come and watch that process. It's exciting. Pulling a case off an ancient model, an older model, is really exciting. And the visitors connect more deeply when they witness skill in action. They come and sit, and they can spend an hour or two when they previously came in just to buy some willow, and they'll come and spend an hour watching a process. They had no intention of watching at all. So again, some more spaces inside the workshop. A table we have to that, which is client prep, where we take client instructions, or we can have the client witness some of the changes being made to their model, or the development of the model, or its progress. And some of the access benches we might have to let people see easily from one side of the workbench to the other without having to disturb the work rate, and see access of models in place. So we try to dress the workshop, not so much as you might, into a workshop area whereby it's nothing but industry. And we try and make it a sociable space and make it as something as they might have at home. From a dining table they would have, because we all have dining tables at home and we do our models on the dining table at home. We try to make sure that we introduce modern furniture, or not so much modern furniture, but modeled furniture into a space rather than just being an industry workshop. It's less challenging because people regard the workstations as being industrial. Well, we're not industrial. We can work pretty much in any location. So as I come to towards the end of why, masterpiece model museums, that's collections where ship models themselves, the headline objects, are straightforward. That's typically Greenwich, Paris, Amsterdam. These are principal museums that dedicate the museum space. That ship itself and the quality of the model is unquestioned. And you have storytelling museums, where collections where the models support broader narratives. Liverpool, for instance, Portsmouth, Cornwall, and Buckless, because there's more to it than just the ship model itself. The place in itself has history. And again, that's why we want to make sure we line our aspirations with those that we think museums can swallow too. So we turn to how, and it really comes down to shared communication and learning. And forgive me, but that's what this might be too. The audience in its own right is a developed audience. We've been modeling for most of our lives and been engaged by it for its benefits of just taking time away from the day job and working it and enjoying that time in the workshop. But this immersive workshop experience is trying to bring visitors to step inside the working shipwright studio and explore tools and materials and methods and works in progress. And we know it works. For 3 years now, as the workshop has been open to the public, we've been overwhelmed by the interest that they've taken in watching shipwrights, hobbyists, visiting amateurs work on models. And I must say, some of the visiting model makers have been totally overwhelmed and engaged by even seeing people being interested in what they're doing. Ordinarily, as each of you will know, you can work on your own in your workshop. Nobody will see what you're doing other than when you finish the model and you might case it and put it on your bookshelf. To have somebody look over your shoulder and watch what you're doing and be enthralled by it is engaging in itself. And we've witnessed that at Antiquaships. But we start with communication and learning. That's how we do it. So enter the Society of Model Shipwrights, a place of study. So part of Antiquaships is where we have the Society of Model Shipwrights library and a place of study, which is not alone to the Society of Model Shipwrights. Most of our visitors can gain access to the study, take time, and to better understand what's going on. So just a brief note on how I came across it. I became aware of the Society, I think, Ian, I might be wrong, but I think I've been a member for 3 years, maybe 2 years. However, I became aware of the Society of Model Shipwrights and I joined. Then through conversation with Ian, he recognized that the new association of Antiquaships to the Society could bring about an opportunity to relocate and re-energize the Society's library. Now, the library has been thinned out through clever work to try and make sure that what's in the library is valuable, and it is. And it's going through a process of being recorded and documented, and in such a way more accessible to visitors from the Society. But Antigua gifted the space to the Society because we're encouraged by what the Society is doing. We're particularly encouraged what Ian's trying to do for the Society. So Antigua is delighted to give its space to the Society, where it now forms a cornerstone for the research and study of almost every aspect of model shipwriting. And of course, members are welcome to visit and use the library, entirely complimentary. So I've kept the annotations on the picture because these are not general pictures of the workshop. This is the Society of Model Shipwrights library and place of study. And again, whilst the members are busy researching in the library or using the library, as some of you who have already visited Antiquaships become aware that visiting public stop you and ask you questions and want to know why you're there and what you're doing. And it's an opportunity for the shipwright or the shipbuilder, the model builder, to be able to converse with Joe Public, who previously hasn't got any experience with that conversation at all. Again, we try to make it a sociable space with sofas, with access, with lights, and with reading places, and with models to reference some of the notes taken in the library. On top of the bookcase to the far side, you can see some holes in preparation, and these are prototype holes from Vanguard models, which we're delighted to be a part of. And Ian and I visited the workshop a little while ago, and this is a result of that. So we're showing elements of modern model ship building and how that's done, and we're delighted to be a part of that Vanguard model project. Again, you can see a close-up of those models. The one to the right is indefatigable. And this, of course, is looking further into the workshop itself. Although it looks like the models are out on exhibition, they're not. Each of the models are accessible to be worked on. So each of the model stations, so we have a mobile workstation, which goes down to each of the models in their case, and we work them in situ unless they have to be taken to a bench. So the offer of Antiquaships in this project, sometimes museums can lack the live skill in the human process because the model is complete in its case and it's on show. There's no real sensory engagement and there's no craft authenticity. The model is the model. It's in its case and it has a placard. But the experience Antiquaships has with this involved and associated relationship with visitors, the demonstration of the model through its interpretation is really visible. We have bespoke exhibits because they're broken. Sometimes they're in dire need of restoration. And it's an immersive workshop access, both physically, practically by visiting, and then hopefully through the 360 project, which I'll share with the other members next month. And of course, it's museum-grade maritime craftsmanship because 95% of the models are builders' class models. As an example, Liverpool is one of the best opportunities in the UK because they're actually asking the question, how do we tell maritime history better now? The audience will, of course, understand and appreciate that Liverpool's Maritime Museum is closed until 2028, 2029 on the basis of just restructuring that museum for a number of reasons and refinancing it. It's a £50 million project. But Antiquaships is aligned with some of the thinking in that particular investment case, and it's where immersive workshop craft and model storytelling becomes really relevant. So to bring the presentation to an end, remember this, we started our presentation in 1757. And you will remember, of course, 6 bells in the afternoon watch is 3 p.m. And we're back at Deptford and the ship is HMS Dublin. Deptford, as painting here, is a beautiful place, noisy and busy, I'm sure. So I have a commission, and the commission is to build HMS Dublin, not as Sir Thomas had designed, but more in keeping how Sir George wanted her. He arrived at Deptford on May the 6th, and HMS Dublin would never be the same again. We opened the conversation with George Rodney on the basis that he knew how to fight a ship and how a ship might be different to how a shipwright might have designed it. So if you imagine Sir Thomas building his ship, he wanted it to be upright, not on its side or sunk. He wanted it to be stable gun platform, and he wanted it to be sufficient to carry the weight of cannon. That's all good. When you read of Sir George, he wanted to maneuver the ship. You might imagine the get the cannon. The gun had little elevation, so he had to use the ship to elevate the gun itself. So therefore, he needed low ballast. He needed active sails, carry more sail than possible, and less ballast than needed. And these contradictions were often at odds with the shipwright. He needed it to be 70 tons lighter. He wanted the latest flintlocks to guns, and he wanted new timber to build quarterdeck accommodation for the officer of the watch and sailing master and the helmsman. He didn't like his officer of the watch or his sailing master getting wet on the upper deck, nor his helmsman. He needed them covered and safe, and asked the Admiralty on several occasions to take some of the ballast out to allow him to have the latest flintlocks, because his gunnery master was Tomlinson, to have the quarterdeck accommodation built to keep his officer of the watch and his sailing master dry, and a capital stand over the helmsman. There we have the characters. The ship, of course, is Mars, not Dublin, but Slade and George are there. Part of the excitement of restoration is that 50% of the work is research and captured in letters recorded in David Spinney's masterful biography of Rodney, which is an extraordinary read, and exchanges by note between the lordships of the Admiralty, Slade himself, and the dockyard superintendent found in the Navy Record Society of British naval documents of the period. Equally astonishing reads, but takes hours to go through to find. But those conversations were lively, if not rowdy, and if for Rodney, very unsatisfactory, because he didn't get any of his ways. He didn't get the ballast removed. He didn't get the latest flintlocks of the guns, and he didn't get the accommodation that he wanted Dublin to have. But Rodney needed a fighting ship, and as he quoted, not a drenched, laboured pipsqueak of a Channel lugger, which he thought the Dublin might well be. But this is where the magic and wonderment of the model ship in retelling history is, because part of the attraction of the experience of Antiquaships is having the public witness that understanding, that research, and that approach to model building that they previously wouldn't have seen, but they can share in the retelling of history. And Dublin eventually left Deptford on July the 1st to Longreach to have a bowsprit and mast stepped and rigged before slipping on the 26th of July to anchor at the Nore. But even before she anchored, holds were being cleared to remove unwanted ballast. Stolen timber was being brought topside for the cabins, and the gun crews were replacing stolen flintlocks. We stepped back in time to witness the activity. The client who's commissioned Dublin wants the Dublin as George Rodney sailed and fought her, not how Thomas Slade built her. And that's the difference between the two, and that's the research and the understanding of why this model that's being built will be so much different to the Mars model, which is held in the National Maritime Museum. They're two of the same ship, but Rodney's ship is somewhat different, and only the effort going into the research and the retelling of that research and why Dublin will be different to Mars is important. So let's not forget that complicated slide we started out with on the keel of Dublin. So just to summarize, Sir Thomas took 8 months, 12 sets of drawings, approximately 100 exchanges of note between Admiralty, dockyard superintendent and his office. It took the shipwright 4 models of the hull and countless hours of real jig and keel laying stocks at the yard, all to change to 2 foot, 2.5 inches. And in this model of Dublin, Antiquaships will retell this story just as I hope I've described in the presentation this evening. And thanks for listening.